I'm Mo Markham, and this is Liberation Radio Hour, 102.7 FM, and then also you can get us Rogers 946, and we will also be uploading to YouTube and Facebook. I am Mo Markham, and this is my guest for the evening, Neil LaChapelle, from Extinction Rebellion in Kitchener-Waterloo. So I will introduce Neil, but I'll just tell you a little bit about why we wanted to have Neil on the Liberation Hour. So I'm part of a group. I'm one of the organizers for this radio show, but also I'm an organizer with Kitchener-Waterloo Climate Save. And the Climate Save movement has a couple hundred chapters across the world, and we support Extinction Rebellion whenever possible and encourage our members to take part in Extinction Rebellion. And that's because we believe that Extinction Rebellion has the most likely chance of being effective in making change in the crisis that we're facing. And also because we believe that the crisis is pretty drastic and we need to do everything that we can. So Neil is one of the organizers for Extinction Rebellion in Kitchener-Waterloo, and full disclosure, I am also one of the organizers for Kitchener-Waterloo Extinction Rebellion, and this is why I thought it would be a good idea to have Neil on. He has been an organizer with Extinction Rebellion for this past year. He has also been involved in peace, environmental, social justice movements since the 1980s. And he's also been focused on nuclear disarmament, anti-apartheid, human rights, gender violence, waste reduction, and natural preservation, and the democratization of education. In his professional life, Neil is also a writer, editor, and an instructor, designer. He's been a startup founder and creative designer for online companies. And we are videotaping today in my home. This is being pre-recorded because today, actually, when this is screening, Friday, sorry, and my cats will join us at times, when this will be shown on Friday, February 28th, and on the radio show, and that night Extinction Rebellion also has an event in Kitchener-Waterloo, so I won't invite you to it because it'll be too late by the time you see this. So Neil, I just also wanted to say that Neil has also been part in focusing on capacity building with Extinction Rebellion, and also solidarity with other local groups and allies, the Wet'suwet'en, the Climate Strikes, and also with KW Animal Safe. So, Neil, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right. So, I guess we'll jump right in and let you talk about a little bit of the history of Extinction Rebellion and about Extinction Rebellion in KW as well.
All right. Extinction Rebellion globally is a big story, but a very recent one in some ways. Extinction Rebellion began in 2018. That was when the first rebellion was announced. In October, I think it was actually Halloween, October 31st, 2018, about 1,000 people got together in London to hear a declaration of rebellion. They occupied the road in front of the Houses of Parliament in the UK, and they declared that the government had broken its social contract with the people, that the people invest governments with authority in exchange for protection and custodianship of common resources, that this trust had been broken, and as a result, the people were going to rise up in rebellion against the government with 3 demands. Those demands were that the government must tell the truth about the ecological climate emergency that we're in. They had to declare it an official emergency. Then they had to act as if they actually believed that declaration of emergency. They had to use all of the tools at their disposal, legislative tools, judicial tools, policy-making tools, to respond to the catastrophe, the climate catastrophe, to a proportionate degree, to a degree proportionate with the risk. And Extinction Rebellion, it was a rebellion also in the very formal sense of saying that the structure and function of democracy as it exists today is inadequate. It's intended to be kind of a Magna Carta moment where Extinction Rebellion holds that the representative democracy that we have, where parties will go, there'll be a general election every 4 years, and we send representatives to Parliament with a very sort of general mandate to implement a platform, that's inadequate for governing our societies. It's demonstrably inadequate. It has not resulted in a survivable world. That referendums are also demonstrably inadequate because they result in majority rule, which can trample the rights of minorities and which can be driven by emotional campaigns and don't necessarily produce optimal outcomes. Neither mechanism is completely pointless. Like they're both useful, but Extinction Rebellion is demanding the institution of a new form of democracy alongside these called a citizens' assembly. So that's the third demand, that governments must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly that addresses the problems of climate change and climate justice and institutes a just transition to a zero emissions economy by 2030.
I'd have to agree that governments are not working at this point. They're not working in the UK, they're not working here. Certainly for the people, we have quite a bit of unrest in Canada right now because of the government's decisions around pipelines and around the what's sweating people, and there just doesn't seem to be there doesn't seem to be a resolution happening. Sorry, I'm laughing at the cats, not at what's happening with the unrest. But I would have to agree on that. Do you want to talk just briefly about the Citizens' Assembly and explain that to people, what that would look like?
Definitely, because it's probably the least understood of the three demands. The demand that the government tell the truth, that's fairly straightforward. The demand that the government act now is also fairly straightforward. The third demand, so a citizens' assembly is, I like to tell people, it's like a jury. Except instead of being on the judicial side of social governance, it's on the policy making and legislative side. So the way a jury works is a group of people are assembled, and they're supposed to be representative of the community, not biased one way or another to the degree that this is possible. A good representative sample of the community will be taken into a forum where they're presented with all of the information and arguments pertinent to an important case. And they're given instruction on how they are to weigh, analyze, and consider that information and come to a conclusion, in this case to deliver a judicial verdict. And their decision is binding on the judge. So when they make a decision, the judge has leeway with sentencing, but if anyone wants to appeal the decision of the jury, they have to refer it to a higher court. So that's very familiar. The Citizens' Assembly is something, some people call them citizens' juries, and they've been used many times, but it's something similar on the policy-making side. So a number of people are gathered. One company that helps facilitate citizens' assemblies will send out maybe 10,000 invitations. I think the question of abortion rights in Ireland was decided
Right.
this way.
Yeah.
And then they get from that a number of people who are willing to commit to participating in an assembly, which will usually take place in hotels over stretches of weekends. And I don't know exactly how the mechanics would be on any given.
Yeah, that would have to be decided.
Yeah. So they're willing to commit to the time, and then there's some screening to make sure it's a representative
Right.
sample of the population, because you wouldn't want anyone crying bias after. And then there's a facilitation process for presenting information and arguments. So different experts, different interest groups, all kinds of people have to come forward and present information to the assembly. And the Citizens' Assembly are able to ask for additional information for qualification. The idea at the initial stage is just to gather all of the pertinent information and make sure that it's understood by people in the assembly. And then the people in the assembly will be mixed together in groups in different ways. So there'll be a decision process facilitated, designed to make sure that all sides are considered, and that it's not a question of personalities dominating or anything else. The idea is to develop a genuine kind of consensus. And the idea is that this adds a new institution, a new mechanism of democracy into our societies. This kind of democracy is called deliberative democracy, as opposed to representative democracy. So representative democracy is what we see in houses of parliament. Referenda are, we know what those are, direct polls of the populace. This would be a third mechanism, and Extinction Rebellion insists that the climate emergency and how we are to respond to it be addressed by a citizens' assembly. The last point I'd like to mention there is just that animal agriculture would have to be one of the issues presented to the assembly.
And I mean, what's happening right now, so much of what happens in governments is, lobbying by all of these groups like the animal agriculture lobby, etc. So that's definitely problematic. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about tactics for Extinction Rebellion, about the civil disobedience and all of that, the history of that, and why that's necessary and what that would look like, what some of that would look like.
Sure. The founders of Extinction Rebellion developed a commitment to nonviolence as a defining characteristic of the movement for a number of reasons. The one that's most often cited is that one of the founders, Roger Howell, he had a past as an organic farmer and a permacultural farmer. His farm work had been continually disrupted by extreme weather events, so he went to King's College in London to study what makes for successful social change. And he determined that really the only kind of change that's successful in transforming societies and making those changes stick, is nonviolent civil disobedience on a mass scale. There's actually another interesting, one of the other founders, I like this story a little better, in fact. Just a moment. This is a very cool story, and I want to refer to my notes. So Gail Bradbrook was actually one of the other three main founders of Extinction Rebellion, and she had a very long history in organizing. So as a kid, she joined the Green Movement because of her interest in animal rights issues. She then became very involved in the Transition Towns movement, which is an attempt to, on a city-by-city scale, create a new, greener, more sustainable, more humane way of living. She she was involved in many protest movements, created something called the Compassionate Revolution, which was an organization which actually gave Extinction Rebellion a lot of its organizational support at the beginning. But she felt the same thing almost all activists feel, which is a sort of crisis of confidence and some moral exhaustion because all of our efforts seem to produce no results. We're losing.
Yeah.
The planet is dying, inequality is growing, what we've done hasn't worked. So she went to Costa Rica on a spiritually guided hallucinogenic retreat.
Right.
And in that experience, she prayed for understanding the social code. She wanted the revelation of the social code for changing, successful change. And she already had, of course, a lot of knowledge about nonviolent civil disobedience, but that's what came to her in that experience. So she brought that back to the UK. There was a third founder, and I want to make sure I get his name right, Simon Bradwell. He describes himself as a professional middle-class shit disturber, or he was heavily involved in local protesting, and he was a very big experimenter with tactics. So he tree sits and glue-ons and all of that. That was a lot of sort of what he brought, was a lot of that tactical experience. So those three would meet and discuss how they could fuse all of their interests and all of their knowledge about how to change societies. Roger Hallam at that point was actively studying at King's College how to do this. It all came together in an understanding that sort of in-your-face, nonviolent civil disobedience, trying to shut down society for periods of time, insisting that change happen, that was the way to go. And Roger Hallam has said, and I want to get the numbers right here, letters, emailing, and marches don't work. You need about 400 people to go to prison, about 2,000 or 3,000 people to be arrested. That was in the UK. We also often say that, referencing some academic studies, that we need to 3.5% of the population to be mobilized and in the streets, and that's not just for a one-off demonstration, but mobilized in the streets, staying in the streets, regularly called into the streets, their numbers replaced by others. If that exists in a society, at least in dictatorial societies, if that exists, they always crumble.
And that has worked actually, I think they studied that, and that worked in the anti-apartheid and movement and civil rights movement, women's movement, etc. So they've studied all of this, is my understanding, and that, and it makes sense. I mean, when people think about, I know a lot of people are nervous about the idea of getting arrested, and I think people should realize that they don't have to be arrested to be part of Extinction Rebellion, because there's lots of other roles as well. But also, if we think about it, if people weren't willing to do that, if people hadn't stood up and done those things, the anti-apartheid movement, nothing would have changed there. Nothing would have changed in the civil rights movement, in the women's movement, etc. I wouldn't have the right to vote at this stage. Things would be very different in our in our societies if people hadn't stood up and done illegal things. And I was just thinking, actually, this is not completely, I was part of a rescue last week. I think I mentioned that, of some animals, and people online will comment and say, this is illegal, etc. This is someone's property, and I say, at some point in our history, human beings were seen as property as well. So we have to look at the bigger picture. Is this right or is this wrong? What's happening to the planet isn't right, and we have to make change. We're going to stop in a couple of minutes, but I just want to, we're going to show a little clip about environmental racism and social injustice related to climate and environment and animal agriculture. And I just wanted to talk about that briefly too. How environmental justice is very different depending who you are, depending where you are in the world, depending on your income level, etc. I know you know the clip, you gave it to me, but I have seen it before, so I'll let you talk about that a little bit as well. Just what that looks like for people in different communities and different economic, people with different economic abilities and of different races, etc.
Of course. Well, one of the things that people sometimes overemphasize about Extinction Rebellion is that it's a climate-oriented movement. And the sixth mass extinction that we are in, a mass extinction being one where 75% of complex life forms go extinct, has many drivers, and the way that animal agriculture concentrates and then spews out poisons of all kinds, like the way it leaches antibiotics into the biosphere and things like that because of how much is fed to animals, that's as significant of a problem for extinctions. So, in the clip we're about to see, it highlights one of the pragmatic problems of factory farming of hogs, in this case, but of any animals, which is that so much manure is produced and collected in these massive open cesspools that they can't manage it. They can't pump it all into waterways, they can't tank it all, carry it all the way in tanker trucks.
Yeah.
When the concentration, industrialization of agriculture gets bad enough, they just spray it in the air. And their ability to do this really depends on having people who live in that area who are powerless enough, who are disenfranchised enough, and who are voiceless enough that they can't stop it from happening. Because no one's going to want to live in a mist of pig shit, honestly. Not just the drugs that are in there, but just normal compounds involved in the breakdown of manure are irritating to the lungs. People have asthma, people have all kinds of health problems in the plume of this activity.
Not to mention the smell.
And yeah, just the quality of life. So these things are always set up in very, very poor settlements, parts of the world, and of course it'll be very often places where farm workers live, and there'll be a lot of migrant labor in the area. It'll be an economically depressed area very often. It certainly won't be where rich people live. So it reproduces all of the dynamics of social oppression, and honestly, the quickest way to solve the environmental problem would be to empower those people. Because, anyone who has the power to not have pig shit sprayed in the air over their house is going to take that action. Like, whatever boots are standing on the necks of these people, if we can help, whatever it is they ask us to do to help shift that, then they'll be very highly motivated to resolve the ecological issues themselves, which is why justice is one of our most important levers.
And just internationally as well, I'll just add, and this isn't related to the clip, but just internationally as well, the people who are suffering the most, the countries who are suffering the most in terms of heat and fire, etc., are most often the countries that have contributed the least. So the people in the Western world who have these massive carbon footprints are not the people who are going to suffer first or who are already suffering. It's people who have very tiny footprints who are already experiencing massive problems. So we're going to break for a couple minutes and we'll show the clip and then we'll come back.
Well, before the hog industry came in, we could sit outside and have family over, friends over, do your gardening, not having to worry about the odor and the mist. Just on the other side of these trees, there's a spray field, and this is where they spray animal waste on us. They're polluting my air and others, everyone that's living near these facilities. They've polluted our water, they've disrupted our quality of life. So why are we being subjected to being forced to live with animals and their waste so the pork industry can make profit? I think that's wrong.
Hi, so I'm Mo Markham again. This is my guest Neil LaChapelle from Extinction Rebellion in the Kitchener chapter. And we are speaking to you from Radio Waterloo, 102.7 FM. And you can also get us Rogers 946. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube. So we are the Liberation Hour. And so we're just coming back. We just saw a clip about some of the environmental racism and some environmental justice issues. And so I thought maybe we can talk a little bit more about what animal agriculture is doing to the planet, Neil. I know, and I think a lot of people know, but a lot of people don't know that animal agriculture, that the United Nations says that animal ag creates more greenhouse gas emissions than all transportation. And yet we don't talk about that, and unfortunately a lot of environmental groups don't talk about that enough, and Extinction Rebellion is one of them. So that's one of the issues that one of the things that concerns me about. So I will let you actually talk about it now instead of me talking about it.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more that it's not on the agenda of most environmental organizations anywhere near to the extent that it should be. People are willing to boycott flying, or certainly it's an easier question to discuss. People will talk about shifting to electrical cars. When you get to animal agriculture, it's a dicier conversation. Yeah. And people don't want to understand, they certainly don't want to confront the inherent cruelty of for-profit work with animals. But it becomes very, very hard for people to accept the scale of damage done by this industry. You mentioned greenhouse gases, so that's about 5%, I think, of carbon emissions, but 44% of methane emissions, which is a much more powerful. So that's approaching half of methane emissions due to anthropomorphic activity. And a similar, and this is rarely appreciated, but a similar percentage of our anthropogenic nitrous oxide emissions. And that is probably the most potent greenhouse gas that is released in large quantities into the atmosphere.
Atmosphere and into the ocean.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so people think, oh well, cows emit methane, so let's go to chickens, and then that's and nitrous oxide is several hundred times more potent than CO2. Is that right?
Yeah, something on that order.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's all a bad idea.
It certainly is. I mean, so it's about, it's anywhere from 75 to 80% of total greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture.
Right.
If you were to strip that out, then you would strip out a vast amount of the greenhouse gas contribution to our carbon budget from agriculture. But of course, the ecological footprint, not just the carbon footprint or the greenhouse gas footprint, the ecological footprint is much larger. There's the land use question. If you were to, take all of the land that was used for animal agriculture and its inputs and take that off stream, you would free up land about the size of the continent of Africa. If you were to remove that, I actually don't know what the impact of the huge amount of antibiotics that are being fed to animals is, as that leaches into our ecological systems, and the number of extinctions. If you start to look at the rate of extinction, which I think we're going to talk about later, the number of extinctions that must be happening under the radar due to all those antibiotics leaching through the world is devastating. And the fertilizer load that we're imposing, the phosphorus and the nitrogens and the other sort of chemical additives that we pump into the soils that our lives depend on, instead of enriching it with organic material. I mean, it essentially becomes, sometimes I think about those, you go into a little curio shop or a souvenir shop and you see these plants and they're just in these clay beads to hold down the roots, and you pour nutrients over them, but the material that it's growing on is like nothing. There's no nutrient value in it. Well, that's what we're doing. We're turning our soils into those clay beads and just pouring this chemical fertilizer on it, and there's a huge ecosystem in the soil that's being leached out as well. It's really just death kind of spreading in all directions from this activity. It's not useful.
And I think oftentimes I will hear people talking about that it's factory farming that's the issue. But if you look at the amount of land that we're currently using, if we tried to have all of those same number of animals free range, we couldn't possibly do that. We don't have enough earth for that.
That's right.
We would need an extra earth for that at least. And so many other issues are still not solved by the free range thing. There's a study out of the University of Oxford, Grazed and Confused. I'm not sure if you've seen that one, but it's basically a study of all the studies that they've done around it, around free range, and still can't afford it, right? We talked a little bit about extinction, and I'm wondering, we've talked a bit about extinction, about the animals that are going extinct, and our own extinction. I wonder if you can talk about, explain to people a little bit about the sixth mass extinction, and then also talk about what's happening with the wild animals becoming extinct from our activity.
Yeah, I mean, I would, of course, we have to expand it when we talk about the extinction of life forms. That includes plants and fungi and microorganisms and everything. And that's almost like, that's one of the more frightening things about extinctions. It's one of the reasons why they can happen quickly, because you can lose keystone species in the ecosystem and the whole ecosystem can collapse. Without the honeybee, everything goes. If bees aren't out there in nature doing their thing, civilization is done. So there's certain keystone species, but by and large, the rate of a mass extinction, there have been 5, and it's when the rate of extinction starts to rise above baseline, you see this rapid fall off in biodiversity.
And we're there.
We're in one. Yeah, it's not controversial. We're in one. So it's like, it's not a question of can we avoid one. It's like, how do we, cope with the fact that we're in one? If you know a conclusive answer to that question, then you can let me know.
I could make millions, billions.
That's right. But the current estimates are that we're losing species at the moment at something of the order of 1,000 to 10,000 times higher than the sort of natural base rate of species extinction, which makes me a little sick to think about. So about at the current rate, about 0.1% of all species are becoming extinct per year. These rates are not declining, however. Next year, the rate is going to be higher. We're in a curve, and the curve is not bending in a direction we were going to like. So conservative estimates right now suggest that we're seeing somewhere between 200 and 2,000 complete total species extinctions per year. It's a very, very hard thing to determine, because there are some ecosystems that are fairly remote, and we have no idea what's happening in many places. But what concerns me tremendously is that some keystone species are under pressure. The bumblebee is apparently under pressure in North America. And if we lose the bumblebee, there's a vast number of important plants that could go. And it just starts a real domino effect. We don't want to see that last domino fall.
And we don't think about insects as being important necessarily, but they are. And again, it's what we're doing to the planet. It's also, companies like Monsanto and what they're doing, the chemicals that we're putting into to our food and into the earth, and just everything that we're doing. And to go back to what we need to do with our governments and change the system. System isn't working. We know that this is killing the insects. We know that this is killing these species, and yet our governments aren't changing anything. And in terms of animal agriculture, they're still subsidizing animal agriculture to the tune of billions of dollars. Just here in Canada, billions of dollars. We will actually, on a later show, we will be interviewing someone from Nation Rising, who's looking at the subsidies that the Canadian government and our governments generally are giving to animal agriculture to kill the planet for us. So that's something that we will do. Should we play the clip about the
extinction?
About the birds and the extinction? Yeah,
I talked earlier about how I don't want to see the last domino fall in a chain. And this video is about one story of a last domino.
Yeah. All right, let's play that. Thank you.
The whole world is singing. Clicking and grinding and whistling and thumping. But we've stopped listening.
The Cornell Bioacoustical Laboratory has the largest repository of animal sounds on the planet. They've been collecting them since the 1930s.
So there's this range of sounds from the largest animal ever to live on this planet to the tiniest little insects. This is a song recording of a male oh-oh singing on Kauai. These birds mate for life, so he would be singing a duet with his mate, where he sings and she sings back and forth. Here comes the male song. There's no response. Here's the male song again. That's the last male of a species singing for a female who will never come. He is totally alone. and now his voice is gone.
Hi, so we're just coming back from seeing a clip. We're on Radio Waterloo 102.7. We're the Liberation Hour radio show, and we can also be seen at Rogers 946 and Facebook and YouTube. I'm Mo Markham, and this is my guest from Extinction Rebellion, Neil LaChapelle. So the clip that we just showed and that you just heard, if you're listening to us on the radio, is the last of a species. And it's hard to watch and hard to listen to, and hard to think about, how much time we have left to think about extinction being real. And I think that's partly why people don't act, is because it's hard for people to really grasp. But I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that, about extinction, about how much time we have.
Yeah, I think that some of the most effective activists I've known feel the weight of these extinctions very personally, and they find themselves in mourning for these life forms as they vanish. One way to imagine the mass extinction is the enormous silence that it will leave in the universe. And I really regret, even though I wasn't in a position to change it, I regret the fact that we ran out of time to make the changes that would have kept that bird, that species alive. We're running out of time on every front. The Extinction Rebellion symbol that a lot of people may be familiar with is an hourglass in a circle, stylized hourglass. And it's to help people understand the enormous urgency of the moment that we're in. One of the reasons that the Extinction Rebellion is a rebellion against the government, it's not that people think government action is especially effective or the only way to change the world. Individual activists in Extinction Rebellion are doing all kinds of things. They're maybe developing barter buck systems where there's local currencies. They're involved in organic gardening, community gardening. They'll be involved in all kinds of different social change activities very often.
Helping people go vegan.
Yeah. Oh gosh. But or cycling, year-round cycling activists.
Right.
But the thing is, because we need rapid action, the government is an institution for accomplishing that. Like complete withdrawal of subsidies to fossil fuel companies and the agricultural industry.
Animal agriculture industry.
Yeah.
Animal agriculture. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it would be a dramatic change.
Right, and I mean, all of that money, if that money went to transition, away from animal agriculture, away from fossil fuels, and towards, green energy, and, I mean, they're subsidizing the food that's killing us and killing the planet. They're subsidizing fossil fuels instead of, getting getting green energy going. And I mean, the Ford government, they canceled, when they came in, they canceled green energy programs,
You could do a whole series just on the Ford.
Yeah,
government.
we could do that. Yeah. And I'll say too, what when I was thinking, like the silence that is really powerful. Listening to that bird and listening to him singing and getting no response, and just thinking about the silence and how massive that's going to be when so many species are silenced. And I have to say, like, I got involved in climate and in politics after seeing what British Columbia looked like when I used to live out there and hadn't been back in 7 years, just seeing the change in just those 7 years. You know, I tell people I saw climate change, and you know, and what we're seeing in Australia. You know, you're talking about extinction. I mean, this year, and they think it's a conservative estimate. You know, over 1 billion animals, and some of them, you know, being driven to the brink of extinction as well. You know, and I mean, everybody looks at what are the bears that are being
Koalas.
the koalas being, you know, and they're so cute, you know, but you know, I mean, you have to look at the bumblebees too going extinct. We have to look at the fish going extinct. You know, how soon we'll be out of fish if we keep doing what we're doing. We have to stop what we're doing, but we have to stop our government from, as you say, from subsidizing these industries and from allowing this to happen to us, right?
That's right. If animal agriculture companies were not allowed to externalize the cost of water to the public, if they had to pay for the water inputs to their production, that would raise the price of their product so much that the problem would take care of itself.
Well, and even, and I think Rob McNeil, one of our other hosts, will talk about this on another show. The maple leaf plant that's being built, the slaughterhouse that's being built in London, Ontario, and you know, like the thousands of dollars for every different part of it. You know, like what they've had to do to the municipal water system, all the water that's going to be going into the Thames, all the pollution is going to be going into the Thames River, all the water that they're going to be using every day. All of that just gets cycled into you know, the city and the county paying for that instead of the institution that's you know, or the company that's going to make all kinds of money off of this, right? So
Exactly.
So in terms of how much time we have left, can you address that? I mean, I don't mean in the show when we are getting down on that too, but I mean just us. And I know as a parent that must be terrifying for you. But you know, can you talk to people about that a little bit? Because you know, we're not acting like we're running out of time.
Yeah, we are not. It's this past winter, glaciologists and people who are studying the permafrost began to wonder out loud if the point of no return has been crossed already. The melting of the permafrost, it's the release of methane from the permafrost.
As it melts.
As it melts, yeah. There's some concern that we're gonna get to a point, and the point of no return, or the tipping point, is it's a point where human interventions to prevent dramatic warming by the end of the century will be inadequate. At that point, we're in fairy tale land where geoengineering is needed, and you know, we all live in underground caves and throw confetti into the stratosphere to try to keep the sun from baking the planet to...
Brilliant.
Yeah. So we're out of time. If you're not in the streets now, then you're in war sometimes, I've heard, people will be shot and still take some steps forward. It's said that they're dead, but they don't know it yet. It's possible that's where we are. If we're not there yet, then I think that the most hopeful message I get from other climate activists is every fraction of a degree counts. The more we can bend the curve, like we're on track for like 2 degrees of warming easily by 2050. But if we can bend the curve to 1.9, that's great. It buys people a little more time in a somewhat more stable ecosystem to be able to develop some kinds of solutions that might be able to bend the curve a little more. The future is going to be it's going to be a destabilized biosphere no matter what at this point. So time is past. I think the time for action passed some time ago. And it's a question of doing our best to pull out of the nosedive so we don't hit the ground quite as sharply.
So really we're past time. And we didn't, I mean, people were acting, but not enough and not big enough.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need is more people.
Yes.
And we need to, and I mean, honestly, what I say to people is, you know, if we're not gonna do it now, when are we gonna do it, you know? And, or who's gonna do it if it's not us, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not me and you and Andrew and David.
Mm-hmm.
Who's gonna do it, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk to people a little bit about how they can get involved and locally and you know, what that would look like?
Sure. First, there's a couple of things I'll emphasize, which is that Extinction Rebellion is ruthlessly committed to non-violent civil disobedience.
Yes.
We can be obnoxious and loud, but it's premised on nonviolence, not just for philosophical, ethical reasons, but for tactical reasons. The strong belief that it is the most effective way to achieve social change. And even though Extinction Rebellion is committed to supporting people who step forward to break unjust laws in order to risk arrest.
Excuse me, I have to turn my phone off.
That's fine. It's estimated that it takes 20 people in support roles, who are in non-arrestable roles, to support one arrestee. There's so much work in the movement for people who don't want to get arrested.
Awesome. So there's lots of people we need, and how can they get involved? Sorry, I'm losing my voice too. How can they get involved? How can they get involved locally?
In Kitchener-Waterloo, probably the best way to, the best point of entry is our Facebook page.
Okay.
So if you were to go on Facebook and search for Extinction Rebellion Kitchener-Waterloo, we have a page. Now the page is where we usually post announcements for events, and we have a discussion group. You go ahead and you ask to join that group, and that's your best way to join us.
Awesome. And if you're in other cities as well, there are Extinction Rebellion groups all over the world. You can check out Guelph and Hamilton, London, Toronto, etc. And I will, we have to end now. We could go on for days, I think, to talk about this, but we are the Liberation Hour Radio, and we are coming to you from Radio Waterloo Community Radio Station 102.7, and you can find us also Rogers 946 Facebook and YouTube, and please join us every Friday 8 p.m. On 102.7, and join us next week. We will have different topics every week, and we hope you join us. Thank you so much. Thank you, Neil, for coming. We appreciate it very much.
It's a real pleasure.
Thank you.